Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Lee, and I'm currently a social work PhD student at McMaster University.
I'm Katrina Hartman, and I am finishing up my undergraduate in health sciences, also at McMaster University.
And we are very happy that you have taken the time to come and attend our presentation on participatory methodologies in Indigenous STBBI research.
So we're going to begin the presentation with a land acknowledgement. So I'd like to acknowledge that we're all sitting on different lands right now. So I'm going to speak to the territory that McMaster sits on, since that is the land that houses the Fee Center and also facilitates the learning opportunities that we have been provided. The land that McMaster sits on is located in the territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, in which the dish represents the land itself, and one spoon symbolizes the people on the land to share resources and asks us to only take what we need. In this virtual space and in the context of this conference, we can honor the values of the Wampum Agreement and recognize our responsibility to only take what is needed and allow all to benefit from the privileges that the land has provided us. And this is done through using our platform and position to propel Indigenous knowledges and create space for Indigenous focused and led research.
So we are here presenting our work on behalf of the Fee Center for Indigenous STBBI Research. The Fee Center's mission is to establish, implement, and sustain strategic research programs and initiatives through a national network with strong academic, community, and intersectoral partnerships. We are guided by three different methodologies: Indigenous knowledges, decolonizing methodologies, and community-based research. So our goal today and of this project is to expand our knowledge of community-based research by exploring the use of participatory methodologies in Indigenous research. Our objective is to conduct a rapid review of the literature to identify unique Indigenous aspects of participatory research towards supporting and grounding future FEAST-funded research programs. To begin our search, we began by developing a list of search terms that focused on gathering theoretical literature on Indigenous participatory methodologies. We drew on three different sets of search terms: Indigenous peoples, different participatory methodologies, and theory. We searched 5 different databases: PubMed, Embase, ProQuest, EBSCO, and Web of Science. Since this search followed rapid review protocols, we decided to exclude gray literature and limit our search to only peer-reviewed studies published within the last 5 years that are written in English. Here are the results of our search. From our initial search, we gathered 479 articles, and after the duplicates were removed, we were left with 364 unique articles. From there, the 364 articles were screened for exclusion. The articles were included in our final review if it contains a theoretical description and an exclusive focus on Indigenous peoples, and the article must use a participatory methodology. For our analysis, information from the articles were uploaded into Google Sheets for collaborative coding. The information from the articles were organized under the CASP headings. Summary documents using the headings were then developed and circulated for further discussion. For our initial organization of the data, we organized the information from the articles using Israel's and colleagues' 8 principles of community-based research. These concepts are partnership, empowerment, community control, mutual benefit, holism, action, communication, and respect. From there, we decided to take a closer inspection into some of the different ways in which participatory methodologies have shifted through Indigenous methodologies and Indigenous knowledge. Our findings in the following section are some of the ways in which scholars, researchers, and community members have integrated Indigenous practices into their participatory research.
So in terms of findings, we categorized articles into 4 themes, the first of which was involvement of elders. So in some studies, elders acted as keepers and stewards of the culture, and their involvement played a vital role in integrating Indigenous knowledges into research practices and perspectives of studies. Elders also participated through aiding the development of meaningful relationships between researchers and the community, which in some cases included guiding researchers in connecting with the larger community. Elders serve different roles such as mentors, leaders, and cultural support, and these roles intersect with each other and their responsibilities to their community as knowledge keepers. As well, in some studies, elders would perform ceremony throughout research activities, such as opening and closing ceremonies, in order to ground the research. And that brings us to our next theme of integrating traditions. So for our theme of integrating traditions, Indigenous community traditions help inform methods and methodologies used in studies, which also enable study methods to work alongside or incorporate community perspectives rooted in tradition and culture. They also help define and understand health and healing from an Indigenous perspective, as these community values are heavily tied to and reflected in traditional practices. Traditions were also used to ground research plans with local knowledge and were used to critique and resist Western imposed ways of knowing. This is propelled through integrating tradition, as it highlights how Indigenous knowledges and practices can meet needs where Western practices cannot. And finally, traditions enable the recognition of the importance of elders, which the implicit relationship between traditions and elders was previously highlighted in our elder involvement theme. So our next theme is Indigenous language. And so our first point is that Indigenous language was viewed as a way to push back against colonization. Specifically, connection and use of one's traditional culture and language was shown to protect Indigenous communities by buffering negative health outcomes resulting from colonization. Language has been used in a way to help sustain the culture and ensure that Indigenous knowledges are accurately represented in the research, which connects us to our next point, that the use of Indigenous languages offers accurate expression and practice of Indigenous traditions that are often lost if conducted in Western terminology. And this further connects to knowledge translation, as Indigenous language better reflects the dynamic relationships among spirituality, nature, and self, encompassed in the Indigenous worldview. Language connects to stories and symbols as a way of preserving history and values, and these values are then used to guide discussion and research decisions. Using this approach of Indigenous values to guide research enables decolonizing the research, as well as reclaiming Indigenous perspectives to promote health and well-being. Language is then translated into concepts to guide partnerships, and specifically terms of engagement and their meaning. So for our last theme, spirituality and research was used to bridge a connection across different generations. So this included the involvement of elders, as well as teaching of traditions to younger generations. As well, it aligns their research with Indigenous perspectives of health and healing, which, as was stated earlier, encompasses the physical, natural, and the spiritual. As well, it restores a connection to family, tradition, and land, as these values are interconnected with the views of spirituality. And lastly, spirituality and research redefines the research world through a spiritual world, and inadvertently creates space for acknowledging Indigenous worldviews and perspectives. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Aaron to talk about our discussion.
So what did we learn from these articles? While participatory methodologies are well used within Western research, greater understanding is required of how participatory methodologies shift within Indigenous contexts. We need to develop a stronger understanding of how Indigenous knowledge reshapes participatory methodologies. Based on what we found was lacking, missing, or inadequately addressed in the literature, we need to further develop our understanding of integrating ceremony, spirituality, and traditions in research, and also identifying the best practices to meaningfully and ethically engage with Indigenous elders. And finally, we also need to further discuss how Indigenous knowledge challenges, shifts, and changes our understanding of participatory methodologies. We recommend an increase of reporting of how researchers use engagement, relationship building, and integration of community in their future publications, just to build on the knowledge that we already have. And with that, we reached the conclusion of the ending of our presentation. We would like to thank the Fee Center for giving us this opportunity to do this research. We'd like to thank our supervisors, Randy Jackson, Renee Mashing, and Will Gooding, for helping support this research and guiding us along. And we would like to thank Bridget Marsden, Doris Peltier, and Alexis Kidd for their support in the research. And lastly, we would also like to thank our research assistants, Carol Rondeau and Maggie Paulus Lines.